Alright guys, welcome back, and we are going to hop into our first unit, um, our stuff with equations and inequalities was kind of review, and I decided there was a couple things that also really needed to be hit before we hit the first unit um, after working with you guys on that review. So today we're going to be going over the distributive property. And just for a thinker or warm up, I have how do you do 13 times 7 in your head? Now, my guess is that most of you don't just know 13 times 7 off the top of your head, um, but you might be able to get it fairly fast. And I think what most of us would do is I think most of us would do 7 first, and then we would multiply it by 10, and then we'd get, oh, well, that's 70. And then we would do 7 times 3, oh, that's 21. And then you would add these together and you would get that to be 91. Now, what you just did in your head is the distributive property. You said, let me take 7 and let me multiply it by 10 plus 3. 10 plus 3 is the same thing as 13, but you did 7 times 10 first, and then you did 7 times 3. So you kind of already know and use the distributive property, but now we're going to use it when variables are involved. So the distributive property A times, in parentheses, B plus C equals A times B plus A times C. And if it was times B plus C plus D, then it would extend all the way for that. So before we really get to use it, let's just review and think about how we multiply both numbers and variables together. So first off, 4 times 6. We know 4 times 6 is 24, right? And now this should be review, but just in case to get our minds working a little bit, 4 times 6x. Well, remember, you can multiply in any order, and 6x is really just 6 times x. So we could do 4 times 6, which is 24, as we just did above, and then that x still just sits out front. And now here is just illustrating that, again, you can multiply in any order, so 4 times 6x is going to be the same as 6 times 4x, right? We're just going to get 24x again, because we just multiplied the 6 and the 4 together. And now we have 4x times 6x. And now this is where it might be helpful to think that you can multiply in any order. So if we have 4 times x times 6 times x, when I see something like these two terms multiplied together, I always just like to do the numbers first, right? Because you can multiply in any order, so why don't we do 4 times 6 first, and then we leave the x's out front. So I always just do the numbers first. 4 times 6 is 24, right? And now, and these are all should have equal signs, right? So we have 24, but now what happens when we have 4x times 6x? It's not 2x, right? X times x, something by itself, is that thing squared, right? So, in other words, we have, an invisible to the first power here, and when you multiply something that's the same, you add the exponent. So we added 1 plus 1, which got us x squared, and that's because when it gets laid out here, we have 2 x's, which x times x is x squared. Now, to extend that thinking to this one here, 3x cubed y times 7x squared y squared. Well, I know right away, I'm just going to do the numbers first. 3 times 7 is 21. And now remember what I said. We could multiply in any order, right? So that's 3 times 7. Well, then we have x cubed, but isn't x cubed the same thing as x times x times x? And then over here we have x squared, but isn't x squared the same thing as x times x? And then we have a single y from the 3x cubed y. And then on the right side we have y squared, but isn't that y times y. So, and I'm just writing it all out so that we learn to be careful, right? Because a lot of people see x cubed times x squared and they want to make it x to the sixth. But what is it actually? It's x to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 x's, right? So that's x to the fifth. And that's just illustrating the point that you add these exponents when they're being multiplied. So 3 plus 2 is 5. And then y, we have an invisible y to the first here. Y to the first times y to the second is going to be y to the third. And you can see that when we wrote it out, we have 1, 2, 3 y's. So that's what that would be. Always do the numbers first, and then add the variables when you're multiplying them. Add the variable exponents, I should say. So now we're going to distribute, and we're going to do it just like we did that 13 times 7. We're going to do 2 times the first one, and then the second one. So 2 times m is just, well, that's just 2m. And then 2 times negative 6 is minus 12. And then this one here, even though we have 3 terms in this second part, we still just do the same thing, right? First, we're going to do 7 times 2x, which is going to be 14x. And then we're going to do 7 times negative 4y. 7 times negative 4 is going to be negative 28. And then we have that y out front. And then we have 7 times 9, which will be plus 63. So same idea. Now we just have more terms that we're going to. And now we're just going to up, I don't know if I would call it the difficulty, but just change it up a little bit. So distribute these. So first we do negative 6 times 11x squared. We would just do the numbers, right? So that's negative 66, and then that x squared just stays out front. And then a negative 6 times a negative x. Remember, there's a negative invisible 1 there, so a negative 1x. A negative times a negative is a positive, and then that'll be 6x. So it's 6 times 1, and then the negatives cancel out. This one, kind of same idea. We have negative 3t times negative 2t squared. Well, first thing, a negative times a negative is a positive. And then we can do 3 times 2, which is 6. And then we can do t times t squared, which again, that'll be t times, and then t squared is 2 of the t's, so we have t cubed. And then from there, we do negative 3t times positive 1, and that's just going to be minus 3t. And then for our last couple examples here, same idea, right? We have an invisible 1 here. X squared times 5x cubed. Well, we're going to have 5 times 1, which is just 5 out front. And then x squared times x cubed. We're going to add the exponents because remember, x squared would be x times x. And then x cubed would be x times x times x. And we only end up with 5 x's. So x to the fifth. And then we're going to do x cubed times, or x squared times positive 3, and that'll be plus 3x squared. And that's all for that one. And then here, same idea, we have a negative, and we have 3 terms. We have a trinomial here. So negative 3z times 2z squared is going to be numbers first. You do negative times a positive is a negative. 3 times 2 is 6. Z times z squared is z cubed. Negative 3z times negative 10z, the negatives cancel out. 3 times 10 is 30. And then we have z times z, which is z squared. And then we have negative 3z times positive 1, which is going to be minus 3. And that is going to wrap it up for the distributive property. Tomorrow we will be going, or the next lesson we'll be going over multiplying 2 binomials.